come on, welcome to this podium our current state's attorney of Cook County, Kim Foxx. Put those hands together.
Wow, thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. And to follow Pastor Turner, that was wrong. But it is always great to be in the company of a fellow Cabrini Green resident to tell the story of what is possible, as you said, for those who come from neighborhoods like ours. It is an honor and a privilege to be back here. I have come to many a meeting here, so I want to thank the Leaders Network for continuing to invite me here, particularly in this last few months of my administration. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve. It has been a struggle that has absolutely strengthened me. So the strength and the struggle message that Pastor Turner talked about, I have lived in the course of the last 7 years. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about the things that we have done and the challenge that we have before us, and certainly want to be in conversation and communication with all of you. Let me just say, it's cold and rainy outside, and when Pastor Ackery texted me last week to remind me about today, I was on my way to Mexico. And I was like, yeah, I'll be there. I got back last night, so excuse my dusty beach hair. And I'm cold. But I would not be separated from this moment. So I just want to thank you again for the invite. When I was elected in 2016, as was alluded to just a few moments ago, I have to give us a moment in history. I have to go back, because there's a lot of conversation about this administration, and I think we lose a lot of historical perspective of where we came from and how we got here. And I think it's just really important, because I read a lot of things, I hear a lot of things, and we do a thing like with revisionist history that is important that we level set. Because however we remember this administration, I want it to be remembered in the full context of the history under which we sit.
That's right.
When I was elected in 2016, that year was the bloodiest year we'd seen in Chicago since 1999. I know we're watching the news and we hear a lot about what's happening with crime and violence, and I don't want to negate that. I just want to take us back for a moment, because you will hear people talk about crime and violence right now as though this is new.
Right.
In 2016, it was the bloodiest year we had seen. I won an election after the murder of Laquan McDonald and the former prosecutor who stood in this role, who took 13 months to bring charges against Jason Van Dyke. 13 months to bring charges against a Chicago police officer who shot and killed a 17-year-old boy with 16 bullets to his body. In 2016, when I won that election, in November, I took the oath on December 1st, and that year there had been over 700 homicides in the city of Chicago. Over 700 homicides. I wasn't the state's attorney for 11 of those months. And I set that context because somehow in the conversation about crime and violence, the state's attorney's office has taken a prominent role in the conversation about who and what drives violence in our communities. When I was a young girl growing up in Cabrini in the 70s and 80s, we had some of the most violent and turbulent times in this city's history. Homicide rates in the 70s hovering near 1,000. In 1989, when I was a junior in high school, and one of my dear friends was shot and murdered, he was one of 863 people murdered that year. We have had a long history of violence in this city, and I will surmise to you and talk about the things that we're doing in our office in response to that. But I think it's really important that we level set and context set for whomever comes next. Because there's a race for the next state's attorney happening right now, and what I will tell you is that neither of the candidates, any of the candidates, will not be able to come here and tell you that they're going to be able to stop the violence in our community until we do the things that we know actually stops violence in our communities. Which is invest in the people in the neighborhoods that have been impacted by violence most. That is by the work that you all do and talk about around economic investment in poor neighborhoods. It's about making sure that we have mental health and healthcare services for all. It's ensuring that we have educational opportunities in neighborhoods for everyone. It is not a surprise that the neighborhoods that have been most impacted by violence, not just during the last 8 years, but the last 50 years in this city, have been the neighborhoods that have had the least economic investment. That's not me making it up, folks. When I grew up in Cabrini, when Pastor Turner was in Cabrini, when we were there, it was one of the most divested communities in the city of Chicago. And we had some of the highest rates of gun violence in those neighborhoods. And it's not because the people who were there were somehow more prone to violence. When you cut people off from the resources and the things that they need to thrive, what you see is violence. I'm gonna just keep it plain because people want to talk, and I just I have nothing to lose. I'm not running for reelection. I'm gonna keep it plain. I'm gonna keep it plain because I'm tired. I'm tired of false conversations about crime and violence and what keeps us safe, and this notion that one singular individual in a role in an office is what's gonna change it when we in this room know what it is. When Cabrini was teeming with violence in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s until they tore it down in 2011, it was starved of resources. I would invite you to go to where I grew up today, 624 West Division. The only thing that remains that was there from when I was a child was the firehouse right on the corner of Division and Larrabee. What they have now is a Target in the building where I used to live. What they have down the street is a Jewel and a Whole Foods. 2 grocery stores. What they have right around the corner on Halsted near Division is what's called an iFly. You know what iFly is? It's a structure. You might have driven by it. iFly is an indoor skydiving place, a place where if you want to pretend to jump out of an airplane, you can do it in a building. Let me ask you how much money and how many resources one must have in a neighborhood that not only do you have grocery stores and schools and your needs met, you can fake jump out of an airplane. On the very ground, in the very neighborhood that I grew up in, and we didn't have any resources. And let me imagine this, folks, that the violence that we saw in Cabrini, you do not see there today. Why? Because the resources and the investment in those neighborhoods reckon with the fact that we also don't see violence. When we talk about the death of Martin Luther King and what happened in 1968 and the riots that occurred in the wake and the uprisings that occurred here on the West Side, and we see that in 1968 he died, that the investment in those neighborhoods didn't follow. The burned out buildings and burned out alleys, burned out places were never rebuilt, never reinvested. And again, we look at the communities that are impacted by violence today, and we see that they have been locked in time in 1968. That's just facts. It's not politics, it's just facts. So emerging from this is a girl from 624 West Division, the child of a single mother who had every risk factor that one would lead one into the criminal justice system, just not as his chief prosecutor. I'm an anomaly, not just because I was the first black woman to assume this role. I'm a black woman from public housing. And I've not been apologetic or ashamed to mention that. And I mention that because when I look at the people who are the victims of violent crime, when I look at the people who are in jail for violent crime, when I look at the systems, they come from where I come from. And what is discomforting is that roles like this weren't built for people like me. So when you talk about the struggle and the strength, I've been through some things in this job. I am unfazed. In the course of the last 8 years, we have set the standard for what a prosecutor's office can and should be. An office that is concerned about the people that we serve. an office that has one who can come into our neighborhoods and be able to see and understand the struggle. Part of that has meant doing things like being the first prosecutor's office in the country to make our felony level data available to the public. Now, most people don't even know that. People will come to your meetings, come to your barbershops, come to your beauty shops, and they will say crime is on the rise, Kim Foxx is doing this, that, and the other, and don't be able to tell you actually how we do our work. So we put it out there, raw data, not me manipulating numbers, so you can see every case that has been referred to our office. And have we charged it or not charged it? Did someone plead guilty, or were they found guilty? Were they sentenced? What race were they? What gender were they? What neighborhood did they come from? What's their zip code? The first time in the history of this office, and ladies and gentlemen, not just here in this office, the first time in the history of the country had a prosecutor's office made that data available to the public online. The most transparent prosecutor's office in the country, but folks won't talk about that. There will be pundits who will say, oh no, under Kim Foxx, and then you say, but the data is right there. People ask me, what is it that you're doing about violent crime? Well, we're focusing our energy and our resources on violent crime. When I came into office, like I said, in 2016, bloodiest year in 1999, I looked and said, how are we using our state's attorney's office resources to keep our communities safe, to address violence? The number one referred case in our office, you would think in that year would have been guns. It wasn't. Shootings, it wasn't. Murders, it wasn't. You know what it was? Shoplifting. A city teeming and bleeding with violence, bleeding with the blood of our young people. We were spending more of our time and our energy focused on low-level shoplifting. Now, ladies and gentlemen, because we have talked more about shoplifting in the last 8 years in this city, where we are losing so many of our young, with the suggestion that, oh, if we had only done more on shoplifting, then our neighborhoods would be safe. Let me take my jacket off. Stop playing in our faces. Yes. Right. Illinois has one of the lowest thresholds for felony shoplifting in the country. $300. You know how we talking about inflation a lot these days? Yeah. $300 gets you a felony prosecution for shoplifting. I'm not saying that people should shoplift, not at all. But when we're sending more people to prison for $300 than people who are pulling guns and taking lives, we have a problem. That's right. When we're on the national stage for the violence in our communities and we're spending more time talking about catching shoplifters for $300, and let me tell you something, Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Kentucky, Missouri, all have a higher threshold for shoplifting than Illinois does. All of them. None of them have the same issues of violence. None of them have the same issues of violence. But people want to keep us talking about shoplifting. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. In the last 8 years, since we've changed our position to say, listen, we're going to raise the threshold to match inflation. And those people who are stealing less than $1,000, we'll still handle them in our misdemeanor courts. And we'll still try to put people in touch with resources and services. Because what we find, not these cats who are running cars into the Prada store and stealing bags. That's a special kind of criminal.
Yeah, that's right.
But people who are stealing to provide food for their families need jobs and resources. Let's connect. And then let's spend our time and energy and effort around making sure that people aren't picking up guns. So in 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, the number one most referred case to our office now, guns. Guns, guns, guns. Now people also want to talk about, and I said I had 10 minutes and I'm gonna go really quickly because I want to take your questions. Well, State's Attorney Foxx, we hear about this revolving door related to guns. Our job is to prosecute cases once an arrest has been made. And then we had a system, and we had a bail system that was archaic. And I talked about bail reform, and people's heads started to explode. Because we had people sitting in jail let's say for shoplifting, $300-400 worth of stuff, and they had a $1,000 bond. They couldn't afford to get out. And so what would happen is that we would pay, on average, $150 a day to house a person in jail for stealing $400 worth of things and hold them in jail for 3-4 months. If they had a job, it's gone. If they're caring for a child, that child is now in the care of someone else. The harm that we were doing in the name of justice was destabilizing our communities. We had a system, I just want to make it plain, that in the name of justice and public safety was making our communities less safe by doing things, particularly to poor Black and brown communities, that were destabilizing. And so Illinois last year became the first state in the country, and I just want to highlight, because we don't know these things, first office in the country, felony case level data public, first state in the nation to abolish cash bail. Which means that now cash is not the determinant of whether or not you're a threat to the public. Because for those of us who have attended fish fries, Pastor Turner, to raise money to get somebody out of jail, for a low-level nonviolent offense where we saw grandmothers and mothers hustling and doing what they can to get $500 for someone who didn't need to be there, just they needed to come back to court. We did that. And people got mad. People got mad. People then started to make up things. Well, what about carjackings? I want to talk about violent carjackings. For every 100 carjackings that occur in the city of Chicago, there are only 12 arrests. I'm gonna say that one more time. For every 100 carjackings that occur in the city of Chicago, on average, there are 12 arrests. So people say, well, State's Attorney Foxx, what are you doing about carjackings? Well, when they make the 12 arrests and they refer them to our office, 90% of them are prosecuted. Of the 10% that are not, it's usually because the evidence is not sufficient for us to go forward. But we prosecute them. And let me tell you why we don't prosecute cases where the evidence is not sufficient for us to go forward. And I'm gonna close on this and take your questions. Because when I took office in 2016, Chicago, Cook County, was known as the false confession capital of the United States. We had more people in this county who confessed to crimes that they didn't commit and went to prison for crimes that they didn't commit. And this isn't just something that people made up in folklore. Everybody knows in this room John Burge. Everybody knows the history of a police commander on the South Side who would put electrodes on the testicles of men to get them to confess to crimes. It's in court records. Now, I should point out to you that there was a state's attorney at the time when this was happening, and somehow we don't engage in the conversations of what was the prosecutor doing when John Burge was torturing confessions and bringing those cases to court. I just find it troubling, interesting, if you will, for all of the interest and scrutiny that I have gotten about not putting a particular person in jail for committing a crime against himself, that we don't have a conversation about putting hundreds of Black men in jail for crimes that they didn't commit, and no examination as to how that happens. I just find it troubling. And so we took on the role of a prosecutor, which is not just to convict those who have done harm, and then to work on redemption and make sure that those people who, even if they have done harm, are able to come back into our communities, because no one goes to prison forever. And I was raised in the Primitive Baptist Church, and in the Primitive Baptist Church, the belief of redemption is at the forefront. It's at the forefront. That you may do a harm, that you may repent for your sins, and that you will then be welcomed back into our communities. And we've had a system that doesn't believe that we are capable of redemption. And at the same time, we had people who were put in prison for crimes that they didn't commit, and this office has led the country.
That's right.
For 5 out of the last 6 years.
That's right.
In the vacating of wrongful convictions. To the tune of over 250 people. Our job is to not just look forward, but also to look back. that if you look in our neighborhoods and our communities, for the people who trust the justice system the least are the ones who understand why we have a federal consent decree with the Chicago Police Department. I didn't make the consent decree, it existed.
Yes.
Who understand the history and the legacy of not just police but prosecutors, and we have an affirmative duty to make sure that we do right by them. The very last thing I will say, the reason that that matters in these conversations, these political conversations, and it's interesting having become a political figure in this city that I love so much, is that I know the distractive conversations that we have, we like to distract. You know why we have ShotSpotter? How many people know what ShotSpotter is? That's the detection system that can hear shots and then it will like alert police. It's basically AI. That in neighborhoods that have been impacted by violence, people have been so leery to call the police even when they hear gunshots ring out, and their own safety is at stake, that they have created technology to do it for us. And what I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is that justice cannot be administered by AI. This is a people-powered endeavor. It is people who must come into court and testify and see and say what they have seen and what they know. It is people, and particularly the people in neighborhoods like the ones that you all work and live in. And so we're not going to technologically get our way out of a system that has hurt so many folks. We will get out of it in the next state's attorney by being honest, by confronting the real issues that underlie violence in our community, by being transparent, by showing our work, by rectifying the harms of the past, by going after those who cause harm, and still having pieces in a place in our heart for those who have even caused harm to be redeemed and to be able to help our communities. That is what I hope my legacy will have been. I certainly hope that I have met the challenge that was laid before me back in 2016 when the people took to the streets and said they wanted something different. We got it. And I certainly hope that in our conversations about what happens next, that we don't revert back to a thing that has never served us. That our fear and our anxiety doesn't let us cling to a thing that has not served us. And so I thank you for your support for the last 8 years. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Questions for Cook County State's Attorney?
I want everybody else to talk, but I know she's on the time schedule. Let me ask mine real quick.
Yeah, I talked long, I'm sorry.
No, that was excellent. That was a great presentation. And she gave us a lot of information that we needed to know. You gave us a lot of information. I'm very impressed. Because yesterday I was at Urban Essential. I was in your restaurant, and I was just trying to slip in there and give you some coffee and get out. And a brother came in there and he was praising you. I don't know the guy's name, about how he had been in prison, and he was one who benefited from, these confessions that were overturned.
Yeah.
And so I just want to ask you, some of these principles that you talked about are vitally important. What are the top 3 things? I want to keep it simple for us, that we should look for in choosing the next state's attorney so that your legacy will continue.
Yeah.
Top 3 things, if you could. I know it may be hard.
Yeah, no, I think you want somebody who's going to continue to be transparent. What worries me when I hear it's election time and people are concerned. We have an issue with crime in our communities. People feel unsafe. That is real. That is real. And so you want someone who's going to be a state's attorney that is going to be able to say we're going to address crime, but to be transparent in how you do it. Yeah. Because what will happen is that they will say, oh, we've got more prosecutions, but what prosecutions are you doing? Is it low-level shoplifting or is it shooters? So we want somebody who's going to be transparent. We also want somebody who is going to recognize that we must work with our law enforcement partners. They're police on every single case that we have. So when I talk about John Burge, when I talk about the consent decree, it is not because I am not in support of law enforcement. It is because of those issues that we have to work harder to make sure that our law enforcement are legitimate and credible. That means when we see police doing wrong, we have to prosecute them. How do I get you to trust me as your prosecutor to come in as a community member and raise your hand and see and say what you saw if you don't see me holding people who do harm accountable?
Yeah.
And so we want someone who says that they have to work with law enforcement, because we do, but we also will prosecute those who go afoul of the law without flinching. That shouldn't be controversial. It somehow became very controversial for me to prosecute police officers who go afoul of the law. And it was controversial because we don't do it here. Because we didn't do it. It didn't mean that wasn't our oath. It didn't mean that wasn't our responsibility. We just didn't do it. And so you want someone who will hold anybody and everybody accountable, even law enforcement. And then lastly, I do think it's incredibly important that we don't stop the work around looking back at wrongful convictions. It is not just for that individual, it is for the legitimacy of our system. Our system cannot be viewed as legitimate if we know that it has done harm and wrong and we have done nothing actively to rectify that. And so those are the three things that I would ask for, but they need to be transparent. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Kim.
We hear so much about you,
Yeah.
and we really appreciate you. I would just like to know, what was one of your major decisions that made you say you wasn't running? Because we need people like you.
Well, let me say it was a few things, but let me tell you what it wasn't. No one drove me out of this job. All right, this is why I start with where I come from. I'm from 624 West Division. I'm on my third mayor, I'm on my fifth police superintendent, I'm on my second FOP president. Donald Trump. I done been through some things. None of that was a factor in my decision to not run again. None of it. When I took this job, the reason I talk about being from Cabrini so much, and I keep doing it because it's like, because this is almost over. And for everything that folks have tried to do to vilify me, what I know is that when I represent Cabrini, and the folks that we have lost there, the children whose opportunities, I wasn't the best and brightest to get to be the first Black woman to have this role. There have been people who were smarter, better, who are in prisons or in the grave. Wow. And so for me, this has been not about like the politics. There are people who get in these elected offices and stay for a really long time. I didn't do this for me. I didn't get into this job for me. It would have been a lot easier for me to walk away. It would have been easier for my children. It would have been easier for my then husband. It would have been easier for my friends around me who I've had to say, please stay off social media, stop fighting with these folks, stop fighting with these folks. But it is about the fact that I had a job to do, a mission to serve. And I believe that I've accomplished that mission. That this office, that was once the false confession capital of the United States, right now is a model for reform on wrongful convictions. That this office that at one point had 11,000 people in its jails on any given day, 70% of them because they could not afford their bond, was a leader in bail reform that abolished cash bail. This office that saw blacks and Latinos prosecuted 7 times more likely than whites for marijuana possession was at the forefront of legalization of marijuana, not because I want y'all to go light up, but because I didn't want us to continue to have the injustice of seeing young black boys and girls go to jail for things that other people didn't. I feel that I have done things in this office that is in honor and in service of my neighbors and my family and friends in Cabrini, and a demonstration of what's possible when you let people in leadership positions who come from the communities that are impacted by our decisions. That ego would have allowed me to stay in this role forever.
Yeah.
But my mission has been served.
Mission has been served.
Yes, ma'am.
Sister Kim, how you doing?
I'm good. How are
My
you?
name is Maisel Sykes, and I'm from New Landmark Missionary Baptist Church.
Blessed.
Pastor is my pastor.
Amen.
I don't know if you remember me, but Father Larry Dowling from St. Agnes Church.
Yes, ma'am.
And I interviewed you when you was running.
Yes, ma'am.
I agree with everything you said then, and I agree with you now. You gave our young men and women, young girls and boys, a chance because of not wanting to convict them on petty theft. That gave them a chance to say, I can be all right. I got a chance now to fix it. And that way, that helped a lot of them to not to go do bigger crimes. We appreciate you. We appreciate what you've done. And also, I would like to know where you go from here. Because I would like to follow.
Thank you, Sister Maisel. I honestly don't know what I'm gonna do next. And again, people, it's like when you first get a boyfriend and people, when y'all getting married, and then when you first get married, when you having a baby, and then you announce that you leaving a job, where you finna go? I don't know. And I grew up in a household, I've been working since I was 14 years old. I've never not had a job. And you always had a job lined up before you left a job. And I have not afforded myself the opportunity to think of what comes next because I have 11 months to continue to do what I've been asked to do. But you should just know, just the way I was raised, like I said, I was raised in a primitive Baptist church. I was raised doing feet washing. I was raised as a servant leader. That service is always close to my heart. Again, for what anyone has ever said about me, it has never been about being rich or famous. It is about being in service. So whatever comes next, I might be rich and famous and serving people. I don't know. I have four young girls. They're not young anymore. My oldest, Reverend Turner, is about to be 21 in two weeks. My youngest will be 18. So I will have 4 college-age girls next year.
Rich and famous would help.
Man, so I need to be able to be in a position to see my girls ascend to the heights that they need to ascend to. And so I think my biggest focus when I am not in office is being the mom and give them the attention that they need.
One more, Dr. McCray.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for accepting the mission. I remember back in 2016,
Speak up, man.
we were out on the south side supporting you.
That's right.
Can't call the name of the place out there. Over east.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were there. We tried to encourage you and pray for you.
Yeah.
We're gonna keep on praying for you. Man, and God is not through with you yet. Finished with you yet. I didn't grow up there, but we knew about it. But there were some mothers from Cabrini Green who moved over on to Wilcox, and some families. They helped raise this young man. Thank God. God, you were there. God took you from there. Amen. To do what you need to do. Stay on the wall. Stay on the wall.
Thank you.
Stay on the wall.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Pastor Fred Wilson, Attorney Foxx, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
I don't know how appropriate for you to be speaking today. I don't know for those who invited you. Today, we make up holidays, right? Today on the calendar is National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day.
Bless it.
So I'm appropriate I wanted to just put a face with your work because you may not always see that from your desk or your office of how your work impacts people. My daughter, raised her from 9 years old, was murdered in Inglewood in April of last year by her boyfriend. And we are still grieving that. We grieved the entire year, my wife and I, and my younger children. And in those barber shops and community talks, the word was, oh, ain't nothing gonna happen. Why ain't you arrested? Oh, ain't nothing gonna happen. The state's attorney goes, oh, the police ain't gonna do nothing. And on December 31st, it's the greatest New Year's gift that we could have gotten. On December 31st at 10 o'clock, I get a call that says he was finally charged with first-degree murder. And I just want to thank you for that.
Well, first and foremost, to you and your family, my condolences on your loss, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I will end, I've spoken a lot about me, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the place, the office. I get a lot of attention, but there are almost 800 assistant state's attorneys who work at that place, who took jobs that don't pay very much. They have a lot of law school debt, and they could have gone anywhere, but they've come to work in service. I have people who work in that office who have been there for 6 months and people who've been there for 30 years. For some people, I'm the first state's attorney that they've ever worked for. For some, I'm the 5th. And the work will not change. The leadership will change. But the dedication of the men and women of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office is second to none. I know I said we're the second largest prosecutor's office in the country, but this is an office that is second to none. Now, we haven't always gotten it right. And what I could tell you is that we have the humility to acknowledge that we haven't. But this is an office that, as we've dealt with the surges in crime, as we've dealt with the politicalization of this work, showed up in the middle of COVID, where family members were losing their lives, where we had our assistants who now all of a sudden were also now being teachers to young students who were isolated, and they put this justice system on their back. That's how dedicated that they are. And I think if there's one thing that frustrates me most is just that, is that I recognize that I'm a figure, it's easy. It's politics. But I don't want to diminish for a moment those men and women who worked on bringing justice to your family, who will be there regardless of who the next state's attorney is. You all have an office of the best and brightest lawyers, investigators, victim witness advocates, administrators who are doing the work on your behalf no matter who the leader is. And it has been an honor and a privilege to work among them, to work with them, to lead them and guide them. And so whomever is their next leader, I certainly hope that they are supportive of them, but to tell the story, to tell that story. We like to talk about, again, the one case that didn't. Every single day in courtrooms across this county, there's justice being served on behalf of those who have been victims of crime. And because it's so routine, they don't write about it. Because it's so routine, there are guilty verdicts happening every day. They don't write about them all. We're gonna keep writing about, that one dude. Because it sells papers. But every single day, in courtrooms across Cook County, there is justice being served. And so for our partners in law enforcement, for police officers, our sheriffs, our state police, and to our prosecutors, really, you should thank them for the work that they do, whether you see it or not. They're not accountable for the bad acts. We have to hold those who do bad things accountable. But the people who are showing up every day on your behalf are doing it not for fame or fortune, but because they have a spirit of service as well. So, thank you all.
And please, one more round of applause for our wonderful Cook County State's Attorney, Ms. Kim Foxx.